What's up guys, it's Brad from LightArchitect. In this video, I'm going to show how you can create a basic portal effect inside of Blender and composite it into live action footage. This effect is super simple and hopefully you can use some of the fundamentals behind it in your own visual effects process as well. Anyways guys, let's get started. Here we are inside of Blender. For the sake of this tutorial, we're going to start off with a basic 3D construction of the geometry from our live action shot. So as you can see here, I've motion tracked our footage, which I have several tutorials on. So if you need to do this step on your own, I'll put a link to some of those tutorials in the description below. But all I've done here for the starting point of our footage is I've just motion tracked our shot here with these various tracking points. And then in layout mode, I've reconstructed the geometry of our shot so that we can now add our portal to the scene and it will move around accordingly. And then we can also use the reconstruction of our environment to have environmental lighting from the glow of our portal on the walls of our environment here. So I'll show you guys how to do that, but this is just going to be the general starting point of our tutorial. And you can see it's just I've just used some very basic planes here in addition to our camera, which is just going through our tunnel. And you can see our actual geometry of our scene is just comprised of these planes here. So pretty simple little setup here. I'm actually going to turn this off for now while we create our portal effect, and we'll go ahead and get started. So to create the base of our portal, we're just going to use simple circle geometry. So I'll go ahead and press Shift A. We'll add a mesh circle, and it's going to come in the center of our scene here. We'll rotate it 90 degrees on the X-axis, and we'll just scale it up a bit here and view through our camera. I'll just kind of place it generally here where our wall would be, and I'll go ahead and turn our background back on really quick, just so now I can select our circle here and place it where I want it to be in the scene. So I'll rotate it around on the Z axis a bit so it can become flush with the wall here. I'll actually just turn off all of our planes except for the one we're going to add the portal to. So now we can just kind of work like this. So we'll select our circle here and get it nice and close to the wall. It doesn't have to be flush with the wall necessarily because we're going to extrude it a bit. Just want to try to get it as close as possible. That's pretty close. And let's check our camera view here really quick. So we have something like this. Okay, and obviously you can place the circle wherever you want your portal to be in the scene, but this is just our first step. Now, one thing we want to do is add a little bit more of an organic look to our portal here. So right now it's just this perfect circle, but we want to actually break it up a bit to make it not quite so perfect. So first I'll just rename our circle here. We'll call it Portal Ring. And then I'll go to our modifiers tab and I'll add a new modifier, and we're going to be using the displace modifier. And then we're going to add a new texture, and we'll go to our texture properties tab here and add a very basic clouds texture. And now we can adjust the various settings here, the size, depth, and the nabla setting, in order to dial in a result that we like. And you can also use some of these other texture options as well, but I found that clouds works pretty well, so we're gonna go with it. I'm just gonna bring the noise size up a bit until I get something that is a little bit less jagged here. So I'll find something that I like. I think probably something like this is looking pretty good. Just keep in mind it's going to be spinning, and yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Take a look through our camera here. So now we have a interesting portal, and you can imagine it here if it were spinning. It's going to create an interesting looking portal. And one thing we can do in order to adjust this portal even further, if you don't like how much our portal shape is being broken up, is we can just dial down the strength setting of this displace modifier. So I'll just bring this down a little bit so it's not quite as heavy. So maybe something like 0.5. Now that we have a basic shape for our portal, I'll select our portal ring here, and I just want to extrude it a little bit so we have a little bit more of a shape to deal with. So I'll just select our vertices here, and then I'll extrude it on the y-axis a little bit to give our ring a little bit of depth here. And then I'll just scale this guy down a bit so we have kind of a little bit more interesting shape for our portal. Now, obviously you can play around with different shapes as well. So it's kind of up to you how distinct you want to make this effect. So now you can see we have a pretty interesting looking shape here for our portal. Might be a little bit too thick here, I think. So maybe just bring this over a little bit and then bring down the strength 0.15 even. So now we have something a little bit more interesting. So now that we have created the general shape for our portal, I'm going to go ahead and under our material properties tab, add a new material for it. So for this main portal ring here, we just want to use a very basic emission material with a gradient color ramp on it for a little bit of variation in the color that it's emitting. So I'll just add a new material to our scene, and also make sure that you are in the Cycles rendering engine. That's the one I recommend for visual effects anyway. And in our material tab, I'll just add a very basic emission material here. And for color, we'll select a color ramp, And now you can see here, I can just select some colors that I want our portal to emit. So I'm going to go with like an orange color here. And then for the other end of the color ramp, I'll choose something a little bit more red. Now you can see if we go into rendered view, we'll have something like this. You can also increase the strength of your settings as well. And you can, kind of dial in the color ramp a bit, and you can add some more noise to it if you want, but this should be pretty good once we have motion blur and everything. So right now we just have something pretty simple, but it's looking nice so far. Now we want to go ahead and create the interior part of our portal. So we just want kind of a hole in the wall here behind our main portal ring, but we want it to have the same shape as our portal ring. So in order to get that same shape, what we want to do is actually just duplicate our same portal ring here with the noise applied to it through our displace modifier, and then extend that geometry further back and then add a different material to it. So I'll go ahead and select our portal ring here. I'll press Shift D, duplicate it, and I'll rename this portal interior. And I'll get rid of this material on this interior portion, and then I'll go back into edit mode, and I'll select these vertices on the left here, and then I'll just scoot them back. So you can see, I'm just going to create a little interior portion of our portal here. And now you can see, if we go into rendered view, we just have this very basic setup. I'll go ahead and turn off our plane in the background. You can see we have this very basic interior portion of our portal that has the same noise applied to it. So it's very seamless in our scene. And now I'll go ahead and add a material to this portal interior. And you can use pretty much any material of your choice. You can even add like a concrete texture to it. I'm just going to use a basic checker texture, just so we have something to see in the middle there. And since it's going to be spinning, it doesn't really matter too much what's inside here. But this kind of just depends on what you're going for in your scene. This should be just fine until we want to add some more tweaks to it. So I'll just label this material portal interior, and we can change that later if we want. So right now we have two elements. We have our portal ring and we have our portal interior. Now it's time to create the sparks for our portal. So in order to do that, we can select again our main portal ring here, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and I'll call this one portal sparks. And now we'll add a particle system to this portal sparks ring here. So I'll go to our particle properties tab here, add a new particle system. We'll use a particle emitter, and we want to emit from specific vertices. And right now you'll see we have particles emitting all over our ring here. And it's a nice start, but we definitely want to change some things, and keep in mind that we're also going to be spinning this. But before we do that, I just want to adjust a few more settings here. Before we actually spin this geometry, I want to actually choose a very specific portion of this portal that's going to emit sparks in order to give a little bit more organic feel, so that the emission is not so constant and is a little bit more believable. So I'll go ahead and under our object data properties tab, I'll add a new vertex group to this object, and then I'll go to edit mode here, and then I'm just going to select several vertices here that I want to emit our particles. So I'll turn these other ones off really quick. I'm just going to select maybe this portion right here. Then I'll change this vertex group name that we've added to spark vertex group. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and assign these selected vertices to this vertex group. And now we have a specific vertex group that we can use to emit those particles in our particle system. So we'll go back into object mode here, and under our particle system settings, we'll scroll down here to vertex groups, and under density, we'll select the spark vertex group. And now you can see our particle system is only being emitted from these vertices. All right, so one more thing I want to do before we start animating this portal is under viewport display as well as render, I want to make sure that this portal ring that contains our particle system isn't actually being rendered. Because we want to composite our portal ring and our portal sparks separately, we want to just disable this ring containing our portal sparks. So to do that, under render, I'll deselect show emitter. So now whenever we render this, it won't actually render the ring, but only the sparks that are being emitted by this ring. Okay, so I'll go ahead and turn back on our portal ring and portal interior, and we're going to adjust these particle settings a bit later. But before we do anything else, I do want to animate our portal opening up and spinning around. I'm just going to animate one of our elements here, and then we're going to parent the other two to it. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'll just be animating our portal ring. So let's go ahead and parent our other two elements to this portal ring so that the animation of all three of these elements will be the same. So I'll go ahead and select our portal interior, and then control and select our portal sparks, and then finally control and select portal ring. And now I'll press Command P and parent these to the portal ring. And now as you can see here, if we move around our portal ring, everything will be connected together, so we can animate them all using just our very basic portal ring here. All right, so now let's go ahead and animate the system here. I'll go to the beginning of our timeline at frame 1. I'll scale this way down, and press I, add a location, rotation, and scale keyframe. And then I'll go to around frame 20 when we want our portal to be all the way open, and I'll scale it up to the size of our desires. And then I'll just rotate this on the Z-axis, spinning around several times here. So I'll probably spin it maybe 1400 degrees here. Then press I again, add a location, rotation, and scale keyframe. And let's just see what we're looking like so far. Okay, so we have a very simple spinning portal effect. Now you can see that the portal stops spinning at that moment, and that's because we need to change the extrapolation mode of our portal here so that it continues on further past our initial keyframes. So to do that, I'll just, while our portal ring is selected, I'll go into our graph editor, and then I'll go here under our 3 different rotation settings here. I'll select all 3 of them, and then under channel and extrapolation mode, we'll enable linear extrapolation. And now as you can see here, if we play through our scene, we'll have a continuation of that spinning, which is going to look just fine. I'll go ahead and enable our background images again so we can see what we're looking like. All right, so not bad. All right, so this is looking pretty cool for a very simple portal effect. Now let's go ahead and adjust our particle system settings, as well as enable collision physics for our particles on the geometry that has been created for the scene. So for any objects that might interact with our particle system, like the ground plane of our scene here, I'll go ahead and select this, and under our physics properties tab, I'll enable collision physics. And then I'm also going to bring up the stickiness all the way to 10 so that our particles sort of stick to our surface here. So now as you can see here, the particles actually sort of stay on our surface here and are interacting with it a little bit more organically. And now I will enable our collision physics for the rest of our planes, creating the geometry of our scene as well. So just enable this here, increase stickiness to 10. Same thing on this one, collision, stickiness 10. So pretty much any object that might interact with our particle system, we're going to enable those collision physics on. So now we have enabled collision physics on our geometry that is going to interact with our particles. And now it's time to adjust our particle system further. So I'll go ahead and select our portal sparks system here and go back to the particle system settings. And let's go ahead and adjust these particles so that they look a little bit more interesting. The main thing that we want to change on this particle system is our object velocity setting here. So we want these spark particles to actually take on the velocity of our spinning portal. So they'll actually fly out with centrifugal force. So I'll go ahead and turn down our normal velocity all the way down to 0. And then I'm going to bring up our object velocity to at least, we'll try 0.408 for now and see where we get. So now you can see they fly out a bit more, and this is getting a little bit closer. However, our particles are living a little bit too long here. We don't want these sparks flying all the way out here. So we can just scroll up here to our lifetime, maybe make the lifetime around 9 instead of 50. And then we have something that's a little bit better here. We can also increase the lifetime randomness to 1 so that they don't all die off at the same time. And our end frame will change to the end of our timeline, so 218. And I might just decrease the lifetime of these particles to 8 so they just die off a bit sooner. All right, so this is looking a little bit better here. You can see that our particles are interacting with the collision physics of the geometry in our scene, which is quite nice. Might just scroll down here. I'm going to add a little bit of randomize to our object velocities, so it's not so uniform the way the particles fly off of our portal here. So maybe just increase the randomize to 0.5. That might be too much. Let's try it out. Actually, that's looking pretty good for a little spark particle system. Now let's go ahead and scroll up here to our number, and I'll increase this number to maybe 100,000. Now, if your computer can't handle this, you can also just enable some children into your scene, so it's a lot easier on your machine to add these extra particles. Let's go ahead and test this out here. And we have something that's fairly interesting here. I think I want to add a little bit more organic look to this, so I might just scroll down here, increase the randomize a bit more to 0.8. Then I'll just bring the object velocity down to 0.3, so it's just going to be a bit more random. There we go. Now what we want to do is we want to, instead of showing the halo version of these particles, we want to actually instance a 3D model of a spark on this particle system. So that's pretty simple. We'll just go over here, press Shift A, add a icosphere to our scene, and I'll make these subdivisions very low. So we just have something like this. And this is going to be our spark particle. So we'll go ahead and label it here, spark particle. And I'll add a new material for this particle. And again, we'll just go to emission, and I'm just going to choose a very basic orange material here. Then I'll increase the emission strength to 3, so it's a little bit brighter. And now you can see when we render it, this is going to be our spark particle. So super simple. Under object, we'll shade this smooth, and yeah, this should be just fine. Put this off to the side here, and then I'll select our portal sparks. go back into our camera view, and under our particle system, we'll go to render, and render as will change to object, and then our instance object will be our spark particle. So go ahead and select that. Now we can adjust a few more of our settings here. So our portal spark is pretty big here. Obviously we don't want it that large, so I'll just bring down the scale here to 0.01 maybe. And now I'm also going to bring up the scale randomness all the way to 1 for a more organic look. Now we have something like this. And this is looking pretty good. We do need to increase the number of particles in our scene a bit more. So I'll just scroll up here, and instead of 100,000, we're actually gonna do maybe 250. Let's go ahead and try this out. It's looking pretty good. If you go into rendered view, just check it out. Not a bad looking particle system here. Now, one thing in this specific case that we want to do is we actually need the geometry in our scene to not show up where our interior portal is. So this doesn't really make sense right now, because obviously the geometry right here, when our portal comes in our scene, it would actually hide this geometry of our 3D scene here. So we'll go ahead and select this plane that acts as the left side of our scene here, and we'll go to our modifier properties tab here, and we'll just add a very simple Boolean modifier. And on this Boolean modifier, we're going to select the portal interior object, and then I'll select the fast solver here. And now, as you can see here, as our portal opens up in our wall, it's actually going to get rid of that geometry where our portal interior is intersecting the 3D scene geometry. So that's just a nice little trick we can use to make sure that we're actually seeing the interior part of our portal here. All right, so this is looking pretty good. Now let's go ahead and set up our scene to do a test render and then composite our different elements together. So I want to separate our different elements into their own separate view layers for more effective compositing. So I'll just rename our first view layer here. We'll call this one Portal Ring. And the only thing we want to show up on this view layer is the ring of our portal. So I'll go ahead and select our portal ring here, and I'll press M and move it to a new collection. We'll call this Portal Ring Collection. Okay, and now it's in its own collection. We'll add these to their own collections as well. I'll select Portal Interior, press M, add this to a new collection called Portal Interior Collection. Okay, and then for Portal Sparks as well as Spark Particle, we'll add these to their own separate collection as well. So I'll select both of them, press M, add it to a new collection. We'll call this Spark System Collection. Okay. And now we can isolate these a bit more effectively in our view layers. So now for this portal ring view layer, I want only our portal ring to show up. So I will actually make our background a holdout, so it automatically masks elements that are behind the 3D scene geometry that we have created, and we'll keep portal ring on. And if you don't have this holdout option, make sure you have your restriction toggles all on here so you can select them effectively. And for portal interior collection, we're going to make this an indirect only, so that it only affects our portal ring indirectly. For Spark System, we'll make this indirect only as well. And now, as you can see here, we just have our portal ring on this view layer. So this is going to be much easier to composite without any issues. So now we have our portal ring here. We'll go ahead and enable the rest of our background planes here so we can see everything as it will be rendered. And yeah, this is looking pretty good. And now let's go ahead and create some new view layers for our other elements. Go ahead and add a new view layer here. And we'll call this new view layer Portal Sparks. And now on this view layer, as you probably guessed, we're only going to allow the sparks to show up. So we'll go into rendered view really quick, and under background, we'll make this a holdout once again. Under portal ring, we'll make this an indirect only. Under portal interior, we'll make this an indirect only. And for our spark system, which hasn't been baked yet, that's why it's not showing up right now. So if we just play through our scene really quick, we'll get our sparks back. Now you can see we're rendering out only our portal sparks as well as the actual portal, but the reason we're rendering out this portal is because we've actually enabled in viewport display to show the emitter. So if we deselect this, you'll see that it's just the sparks. I'll go ahead and just bake out this particle system just so we don't have to play it from the beginning every time. All right, so now as you can see here, we have only our sparks on this view layer, which is exactly what we want. And we have two more view layers we need to create. So I'll go ahead and go back into solid view, add a new view layer here. We'll call this one Portal Interior. And for this one, as you guessed, we're only going to render out the interior version of our portal. So I'll make portal ring indirect only. We'll leave portal interior on, and we'll make spark system only indirect. And then for background, we'll again make it a holdout. Now you can see we only have the interior portion of our portal on this view layer, which is exactly what we want. All right, so finally we're going to make one more view layer, and that's going to be our background view layer. So I'll go ahead and add a new view layer, and we'll call this one Environment lighting, okay? And we're actually going to make everything indirect only except for our background 3D scene geometry creation here. And we're going to use the geometry in our scene to collect the light that's being emitted from our portal and then composite that light on top of the live action shot. So this is one way you can get accurate 3D lighting from CG elements added onto your live action shot. We'll leave our background on and we'll make everything else indirect only. So now as you can see here, if we render this out, we'll have something very simple like this. So you can see on our background, we have this part that's being lit up by our portal elements. Now, one thing I want to do before we actually render this out and composite it is just project our live action shot onto our geometry that we have created here so that we can more easily isolate the light coming off of this portal here. So I've actually taken a screenshot from frame 1 of our video here, and we're going to project this onto the environmental geometry. So we're just going to do a very basic camera projection onto our geometry planes here. So in order to do that, I'll go to our material settings tab, add a new material. We'll call this background projection for lighting. And we'll make our base color an image, and we'll add that image, open up a new image here, and we're going to find that frame 1 for projection, open this up. We'll go to frame 1 here. We'll add this material to all of our different environment geometry planes here, like so. So now we have our background projection material on all of our geometry here, and I'll select all of them at once here by holding shift and selecting them all, and then I'll go to edit mode with them all selected, go into wireframe, select all the vertices here, go into camera view, very important when you're projecting to go into camera view, and then at frame 1 I'll press U and then project from view. And now as you can see here, if I go into object mode and go into rendered view, you'll actually see that we've projected this image onto our various pieces of environment geometry here. So now what we want to do is we want to find the best pass to use in order to isolate this environmental lighting. So my guess it's probably going to be like a glossy direct pass because I've done this before. So if we go here to our viewport shading, we can actually view different render pass options. So I'll select glossy direct, and now as you can see here, this is a nice pass that we can use to overlay this environmental lighting. So now we know we need to export a glossy direct pass rather than a combined pass where the background projection shows up much more. So what we're going to do is on this environment lighting view layer, under our view layer properties, I'm going to not include our combined pass, but rather instead, we're going to include glossy direct so that we can overlay this lighting data on top of our live action shot. So I hope that makes sense, guys. If you have any questions, leave it in the comment section below. But essentially, we're just overlaying the lighting data from the portal on our environment on top of our live action shot in the compositing process. Now that we have all 4 of our different view layers, let's make sure we have everything we need here. So we have portal interior, portal sparks, and portal ring. Everything is looking good. For our portal sparks, I may want to add a little bit more sparks on this particle system. So I'll just use children in this case. I'll use simple children. I will change the render amount to maybe 3, display amount to 3 as well. So we're adding 3 children particles for every 1 main particle. And then we'll play around with the radius here. That's how far the children particles are away from the main particle. So probably 0.2 is about right actually. And then for randomized size, I pretty much always increase that a little bit, maybe 0.5 is just fine. Okay, so now we have some children particles on our main particle system as well. And yeah, I think we're ready for a quick test render, and we'll get into the compositing process. Before we do that, I do want to go over my render settings really quickly. As I mentioned, I'm going to render in cycles. I'll render at 38 samples for this test render. I will enable denoising in case we get any crazy fireflies, but that's sort of up to you there. For advanced, I've selected the seed stopwatch for some noise variation, and it's also important that you enable motion blur so that your portal has very organic motion blur on it. So I'll enable that here. I have the shutter at 0.2, but you can also play around with different shutter settings as well. Okay, also make sure that you have transparent selected so that you can render out your element with an alpha channel for effective compositing. All right, so now that we have our render settings figured out, you can find a good output for your file, and let's go ahead and give a quick test render and see what we get. Alright guys, so this is our test render right out of Blender. Obviously we haven't done any compositing yet, and we need to add our other view layers on top of everything. So I'll go ahead and close our window here, and we'll go into our compositing tab to get started. So as you can see here, what we have so far is our live action footage, and then we've overlaid our first view layer, our portal ring, on top of our shot using a very simple alpha overnode here, which is going into our final composite. Pretty simple setup so far. That's just the automatic setup that Blender has created whenever you track your shot, but let's go ahead and composite this a bit better here. what I'm going to do is overlay our elements in a different sequence to make them blend together effectively. So what I'll do here, I'll go ahead and duplicate our render layer node. The first thing we're going to overlay before we actually even overlay our portal ring here is actually our environmental interaction. And to do that, we're actually going to use an add node rather than an alpha over node. So I'll press Shift A, go to color, mix, add this right here. And then for this render layer node here, we'll go to our environment lighting tab. Then we'll go to glossy direct, overlay this on top of our footage, and we'll change the blend mode to add. And now as you can see here, we have overlaid the actual lighting portion of that render layer on top of our footage here. Since we're getting some fireflies, I do want to blur it a bit, and I also want to enhance the amount of glow that's being added to this environmental lighting. So first thing I'll do is I'll add a blur node. So I'll press Shift A, go to filter, blur, add this right here, make it bokeh and gamma. Just increase this a little bit to take off the edge from our fireflies here. Maybe a little bit more, like so. So now you can see it's just blending into our shot a bit better. Now obviously increasing the samples would also help with this, but that kind of depends on how many samples you want to use on your render. So I'll also, to make this a bit brighter, I want to just increase the factor of our add node here. So maybe just make this 1.5. And one more thing I want to do is just press Shift A, then I'll add a glow to this environmental lighting as well. So go to filter, glare, add this right here, change the type to fog glow. We'll make it a medium quality and then bring down the threshold to 0.2. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Of course, you can adjust further if you like, but let's go ahead and continue with our composite. The next thing we're going to add actually before our portal ring here that's been automatically added to our scene is our interior portal render layer. So I'll go ahead and again duplicate our render layer here, and I'll also duplicate our alpha over node. Add this before our portal input, and I'll actually just bring our factor down for this portal for now. And then for this render layer, I'll switch this to portal interior. Then I'll add this image into our bottom input of our alpha over node. And yeah, there we go. Now we have the interior portion of our portal there. And I don't think I'm going to do anything to this yet, but I just want to get everything in place here in the right order. So now we can enable our portal. So go ahead and increase the factor all the way to 1. There we go. Looking pretty good here. I want to add some glow to this portal ring. So I'll press Shift A, add another glare node here, make it a fog glow node. And I'll just bring down the threshold to 0.2. So it's adding it to almost everything. Already this is looking a bit better. I'll make the size a little bit smaller at first. And then what I like to do is I actually like to duplicate our glare node and then increase the size and do this kind of in series. Duplicate this one more time. And then I'll make this final one size 9, so it's just glowing a lot more. And now we can see this environmental lighting is making a bit more sense on the actual environment here. Might bring down the mix factor to something like negative 0.2, so it's not quite so bright here. There we go. Then I'll also might bring down the threshold on our initial fog glow node here to 0.1, and then the quality to high. And now this honestly comes to a lot of tweaking here, guys. So you kind of have to find the right balance of how much glow you want, how big you want it to be. This is looking decent here though. So I'm gonna go with this for now, and then we're gonna add our sparks and then adjust from there. So now that we have our portal ring node, I'll just go ahead and duplicate all of these guys. Press Shift D, duplicate this whole setup and plug this into our composite and our view node. And then I'll take our output here into the top input of our new alpha over node. Now we'll change this new set of nodes. Instead of portal ring, we'll change it to portal sparks. And now we should get those sparks interacting in our environment here. All right, that's actually looking pretty cool here. Now, obviously we need to adjust a few things. I might not have the third glare node that I've duplicated here on the sparks view layer, so just remove that a bit. But I'm actually liking the general look here. One thing I might do is just dial down the sparks a little bit. So maybe bring down the factor input to like 0.708. So now it's just a bit more subtle. I might split the difference, maybe do like 0.86. Okay, now we have a pretty interesting looking portal here. I think the main thing to adjust in this case is the amount of glow on the main portal ring, as well as the environmental lighting. So you want to make sure that the environmental lighting makes sense based on the brightness of the actual portal ring. So I might just add one more glare node here that's of a low quality with a really high size. Just see what an extra bit of brightness will do for it, you know, around the entire portal. Might be too much. Let's see. Yeah, way too much. Maybe I'll just do like 0.5 on the threshold. Okay, that's looking a little bit better. Maybe still a little bit less, 0.2. Then I'll also increase the brightness of our environmental lighting. So I might just bring up the factor here all the way to 2. Let's see what we get if we get a little bit more environmental lighting on our background. Okay, so a little bit more there. Maybe I will bring down the glow threshold, try to increase the environmental lighting a bit more. There we go. Now we have a little bit more environmental lighting on our scene. I think our portal is still a bit bright, so I might just lose our last glare node here. All right, this is looking pretty good. Obviously, there's a lot you can do here depending on the effect you're going for as well. But this is the general idea here, guys. Now you have all these different view layers to work with. Pretty simple little compositing tree here, nothing too complex. Usually what I'll do in my composites is I'll export a multi-layer OpenEXR sequence and then composite using those sequences rather than just rendering out a single frame like this. And I do have a tutorial on that workflow as well. But this is where I'm going to end this video for now. This is the general concept here behind creating these portals. Obviously, to render this out, if you like your result, you can just go to render and render animation, and your composite sequence will be output in a PNG format here, depending on the file format that you have selected. By default, it's usually PNG, which is pretty good. Or you can export a multi-layer OpenEXR sequence as well if you want to composite with a bit more control in another compositing software. Anyways, guys, that is it for this video. Hope it was helpful. As always, feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions in the comment section below. Let us know what you'd like to learn next on the channel, and I'll see you next time.